Alone in a Great City. First installment. Smart Set. November 1927. This girl came to New York deliberately searching for its thrills and its perils. Her story is gospel truth. What did she find? Many things that will amaze you when you read them, as they amazed her when she lived them. A little girl all alone in a big city. That phrase fitted me perfectly. It was early morning in October. The place was Grand Central Station, New York, and I, just 19, about 5 feet 2, weighing about 100 pounds and fresh as paint, was out hunting New York's perils. Don't get me wrong, I was no crusader trying to find New York's wickedness so that I could do away with it. On the contrary, I wanted to get into it. I wanted fun and thrills. I wanted New York to live up to its reputation. I wanted city slickers to try their lines on me and get the shock of their lives. I knew I was pretty. After all, I wasn't blind, and I'd had enough boys rushing me to realize I was no flat tire, though I was still heart whole and fancy-free. There was nobody closer to me in the world than my fussy Aunt Ida, who had never had a date in her life. I didn't intend to stay a 2 a.m. girl in a 10 p.m. town, so I lit out. I had my living to earn, but I couldn't see kissing adventure goodbye in exchange for matrimony in a one-gas station village. I chose New York as my hunting ground because I thought I knew all about the metropolis. Long ago, back in the Wisconsin town where I had been born, Manhattan madness had seized me. I had read of Broadway and Fifth Avenue, of Madison Square and Greenwich Village. I had read of the Diamond Horseshoe at the opera, of glittering gold diggers and nightlife. I had dreamed of pearls and emeralds, and I thought New York was a woman's paradise. Vim, vigor, and high life of a big city. I wanted to know them all, and as I stood there in the station, my dreams were all of rose and gold. In fact, I had that morning all the blissful ignorance of the perfect idiot. I had $200 saved from my summer job, and 50 more Aunt Ida had given me. I was without references, but I didn't care. I refused to believe I could go broke. I had 3 new dresses, 4 hats, and 6 pairs of slippers. Then suddenly, standing there in that great terminal, with the crowds, the noise, and the excitement just as I had dreamed it all, I became panicky. After all, I was alone, and it was a big city. I didn't know just which way to turn. So I pulled my first boner. I saw a kind-looking woman standing near, and asked her if she knew where I could find a room. And what a lot of luck that question didn't bring me. I can only excuse the subsequent events on the ground that she was a nice-looking old thing, rather like Aunt Ida, and I wasn't suspicious when she asked me to go with her, nor when she began questioning me about my age, my home, my people, and my money. I answered her questions and then repeated my request about a room. At that, my unwanted guardian grabbed me firmly by the wrist and piloted me out of the station. I tried feebly to escape from her, but very soon I found myself guided into a comfortable home. There she made me sit down while she got a telegram blank and wrote a message. I knew the message must be about me, and that knowledge didn't increase my happiness. I didn't know whether she was wiring for poison or a patrol. I had to grin at myself just the same. There I was, fresh as a daisy, out looking for perils, and already being quietly bossed. The first guardian of my girlhood handed me over to another, who took my hat and coat, while another took my suitcase. A third said I'd better have my lunch now. I said I'd gladly go out for lunch, but she saw through that easily enough, and led me into a dark basement where the whole institution seemed to watch while I ate a dish of dusty hash, 4 prunes, and drank some pallid coffee. Then the questions began again. A woman with a manner smooth as a plate led me away to a little room and shut the door. "Now, Betty," she said, "tell me just why you ran away from home. Nobody can hear us." "I didn't run away from home," I said. "I'm here in New York to get a job. I've got money, and I can get more for my aunt if I need it. I'm 19 and graduated from high school. What right have you to detain me here? I didn't ask for charity over there in the station, but merely advice. Now I don't want either from you. Let me have my things and go." "Betty dear," she said, "don't you realize that 20,000 girls have disappeared off the streets of New York, never to be seen again?" "Well, can't I disappear if I want to?" I was angry by this time, and I didn't care if she knew it. "What business is it of yours what happens to me anyway?" "We are going to protect you," she said, and her voice was too honeyed for endurance. "We shall protect you even against yourself. We've wired your aunt about you. When we get word you aren't a runaway, we may release you, but not before. Now go downstairs and read a nice book, and I'll see what we can do about getting you work later on." Having been such an idiot as to get myself into this fix, I went slowly back to the dismal basement. There was nothing else I could do. I certainly felt discouraged. Was this the real New York? Was it actually so vicious that interfering women like these were necessary? I started to walk about the building. Attendants shooed me back into the basement. The windows there were barred, so were the doors. I couldn't escape. I didn't even know where my hat and coat were. There were only 3 books in the bookcase, one a hymnal, one a sort of calendar, and the third The Spotless Life of Elsie Dinsmore. Supper time came finally. They fed me and then suggested I go to bed. In the little cell-like room on the 4th floor, the window wouldn't open, but the damp air had crept in somehow, and the sheets were cold and clammy. I heard a clock strike 8. The magic hour of New York, when dinner parties are ending and theater crowds gathering. 8 o'clock, and me in bed. Oh, what a hot time I was having with the perils of New York on my first night. Aunt Ida must have come to my rescue, for next morning they announced, without giving me any details, that they were sending me to a girls' club. Not that I had anything to say about it. I could only tag along after the fat woman who held my suitcase and money. We rode through crowded streets on a crowded trolley. She made no attempt to talk to me, but indicated when we were to get off. My heart lightened when I saw that the club building was beautiful, but when I saw the girls inside, I knew the place wasn't as sweet as it looked. For all those girls talked out of the side of their mouths like prisoners. I was sent to bed at 10 that night. Next morning, a doctor put me through a mental test. He passed me on to a second for a physical examination. From him, I went to the employment manager, who had to get the statistics on my education, handwriting, and whatnot. In combination, those 3 made me feel I hadn't even an expression I could call my own. "Why do I have to put up with this?" I asked. "Please let me go. I don't want this charity." But once more, I was met with staged smiles and was told to go upstairs. Temporarily, they gave me a job as a chambermaid to 18 bedrooms on the top floor, and for more than a week they held me there. I couldn't go out. I couldn't telephone. Letters were inspected before mailing. They said, "It's never safe for a girl to telephone any man in New York. Never go to a man's office and never have anything to do with a rich man. They don't mean well by pretty country girls." I was to stay long enough in New York to learn what bunk all that was. But for the moment, their system was too perfect for me to buck, so I kept my mouth shut and dreamed of freedom. The first break came when they announced my tests showed I loved children, and that accordingly they had secured work for me at a kindergarten. It was a great opportunity, they said. The opportunity, as it turned out, was Mrs. Schwartz's son. His mother said of him that there was just something the matter with him, and there certainly was. He was 16 and still in a wheelchair, and his head wouldn't stay upright. My big opportunity was to work at the kindergarten from 9 until 1, and with Mrs. Schwartz from 1 to midnight looking after the boyfriend in exchange for room and board. One day of it, and I turned that job down to the club attendant who called to inspect me. So the next day, I got another opportunity. This was as nursemaid to a minister's 3 kiddies. The plan then was for me to do the kindergarten in the morning, to work at some store in the afternoon to earn spending money, and to stay at the minister's at night and tend the children in exchange for room rent. I'd have to pay my board from the afternoon's earnings. And those were the great big lucky breaks, enough to break the heart and soul of any girl, which were offered to me in New York. I wanted perils, but I wasn't going to be driven into them, and such a life I knew would soon drive me mad. So I tried strategy. I was still under the domination of the club, and they still had my money. So I went to the head matron and staged a scene. "I'm beaten by the city," I said. "I want to be just a country girl. Let me have my money and return to the simple life and my Aunt Ida." Now that was the kind of story they wanted to believe. They'd not believe I had come to New York ready and willing to earn my way. They liked to think the town was wicked and that I was licked. They extracted my promise I would send them a telegram when I got home, and then an attendant walked with me to the corner and put me on a trolley car alone. It was my first bit of freedom. I walked to the front of the car to the platform with the motorman and slipped off at the first stop. I threw back my head and drew the sharp, clear air of New York into my nostrils. Alone and free. I counted my money and laughed for joy. Thanks to the charity I hadn't wanted, I was out no money, but in a lot of experience. I didn't know where I was going, but I started out again, humming a song on my way to the territory of thrills. The side street through which I found myself walking was a neat, quiet one of old brownstone residences. I liked its appearance, and seeing a card in one of the windows, furnished rooms, I went up the front steps. Behind a sharp-nosed landlady, I toiled upstairs to a tiny hall bedroom on the 4th floor. $4 a week in advance and no cooking, she said. I paid her and gave her my suitcase. I have to go look for a job, I explained. I ran through the streets this time, ran because I was so happy, or stopped because I was so interested, or did quite as I pleased. I soon saw that my prettiness wasn't lost in comparison with city beauties, for already 3 men had spoken to me in soft insinuation, and 1 had followed me for several blocks. How to get at the New York I wanted? That was my problem. I began thinking intently as I walked along. Through the nightclubs, that was the way. Nothing but work happened in New York in the daytime. Night was the time for the life I craved. As though in direct answer to my thought, I saw a card tacked up before the entrance to an employment agency. Girls wanted for nightclub cloakroom work, it read. $15 a week, no experience necessary. Apply upstairs. I ran up the dark and dirty stairway into a dark and dirty office. A fence divided it, and from the far side of it an oily man smiled at me. I'd like that nightclub job, I said. $5, he murmured. $5 for what? I asked. For telling you where the job is, he replied, still grinning at me. Come across, sister, and I'll send you for it. You're the type they want, all right. All I got for my money was a slip telling me to report at a Broadway address at 4 o'clock. The room, in a building that had once been a famous hotel, was small and crowded with girls. They were young, all of them, and would have been pretty except for the hardness of their faces. They sat in lines against the wall, and in the center, a short man, coatless and perspiring, walked up and down issuing orders. He made me walk around the room, and then told me to sit in the corner. He began routing the girls. He was only a puppet in a great combine that controlled the concessions at 20 first-class cabarets and nightclubs. His firm had the privilege of selling cigars, cigarettes, and nuts, together with the cloakroom rights. Some way or other, they had worked out a theory that shifting the girls every few days made for more money and tips, as many nightclubs have regular patrons who tip a new girl more than they will one with whom they are familiar. This, of course, the concessionaires fostered, for they themselves got the tips from the girls to whom they were originally given. A tall, handsome girl came over to me and introduced herself merely as Martha. I break in the new girls, she announced. I'll see you around the floor tonight at Tawny's Club. Write down the address and meet me there at 10 o'clock sharp. What a lot of things I didn't know then. I didn't know where that address was. I certainly didn't dream it was in the middle of the Negro section, and I had no realization that going on the floor meant trailing about from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, trying to sell nuts that no one wanted, at fabulous prices, for tips I couldn't keep. Martha, I found on arrival, was head of the cloakroom. That's the best job in a nightclub. Sometimes men tip the coatroom girl both coming in and going out. It's either the first money they spend or the last, and therefore it is worth getting. Furthermore, the girl who doesn't work the floor escapes the flirtations and the insults. I slipped into the uniform Martha gave me, a bright red thing with a very short skirt, and put on the violent makeup she ordered. I tried to remember all her instructions. Every time the music stops, you go in on the floor with this tray of nuts, she said. Each package costs 25 cents, but if you see a bozo is very pie-eyed, charge him more. Here's 75 cents change. Never have more than that for changing $1. That way, you're positive to knock down a quarter. Talk to the men exclusively. Pay no attention to the women. They'll always try to crab the sale. Keep a couple of tips in sight on the tray as you go around. The rest you give to me when you come out here, and I put it in this bank, which is unlocked down at the main office. And don't try to knock down on your tips, cutie, for the head waiter is on the firm's payroll, and he'll keep an eye on you around the floor and count just how much you take in. You ought to get at least $30 a week in tips. Kid him along and get the coin. If you turn in $30 to the company, you get $15. More than that, you win just half of what you turn in. Less than $30, you're fired. Together, we filled the tiny wax envelopes with peanuts and almonds, about a dozen nuts in all. They must have cost about 4 cents wholesale. And those I was supposed to dispose of for 25 cents plus a tip in order to get $15 in a week's time. The music stopped blaring, and Martha said, "Go on in now." At first, it seemed too ghastly going about that room. I met either frozen faces or 2 amorous ones, and I only disposed of 4 packages of those silly nuts. The music started again, and I got a sharp scolding from Martha. "You'll never make any money selling that many," she said. The second time, it was not so difficult. Before my 6th trip, I had learned the trick of sliding up to a table, of fluttering my eyelashes, and of coaxing a man into buying the nuts because I was a good kid, and of working a quarter tip out of him in addition. If I saw they were trying to make a hit with their girl, I would seek them out. Then they'd buy to prove they were good fellows. If they were alone, they'd buy for the sake of a moment's conversation. It was only the couples who looked accustomed to one another I let alone. Those men would never buy. There was one man who bought of me every time I went around. He sat alone, and as the night wore on, he got steadily drunker. I was getting more and more tired as the hours passed, and the sales became more difficult. That was the reason my kind of job was given new girls. The girls who were old at the game wouldn't do it. The air in the cabaret was stale and feverish, and the band blared louder. I reckoned up my tips and knew I had earned $4.30. Martha said that wasn't half enough. I was getting very hungry. "Can we get food?" I asked. Martha called a waiter, but I was aghast at the prices on the menu he showed me. Even a cup of coffee cost a quarter. So that was all I ordered. Martha and Ruby ordered heavily. "You'll learn how to pick up the price of your meals before long," they said, and winked elaborately. The waiters were running about, singing, carrying heavy trays of bacon and eggs. "6 o'clock, Betty," said Martha. "You can quit now, but remember to report at the Broadway office this afternoon at 4 to see where you go from here. Me and Ruby ain't leaving just yet." I didn't stop to question them in any way. Perils? This? Not for me. I slipped out of the uniform, back into my own street clothes, up the dusty stairs into the pure morning light. I hurried down the dingy street to a white-tiled restaurant, went inside, and ordered breakfast, for I was nearly starved. A tall man in uniform slipped in beside me. "Where are you going, sister?" he asked. My heart started to pound again. "Home," I said. "Saw you come out of Tani's just now," he said, and this time his voice purred. "Yes," I said. "I'm new there. I've just finished my work, and I'm going home." "The girls up at Tani's know enough to be nice to me," he said. "If you weren't so new, you'd know that too." I looked about me, thinking fast. The waitress slipped a plate of sizzling bacon before me. Gosh, how I wanted it, but here was possible lockup facing me again. He was a huge man, and his back was to the door. I trusted myself to move faster than he could. It was my only chance. I brushed my gloves from the table. He bent down to get them for me, and I took to my heels. I flew out the door, down the street, and into a taxi standing there. "Quick, quick," I said, "to the nearest subway station." The subway was near, and a train just pulling into the station. I slipped aboard with just time enough for the backward glance that told me I wasn't being pursued. Experience was coming much too thick and fast to suit me. I toiled up the steps of the rooming house, longing for rest, unlocked the door, only to be met by the forbidding face of the landlady. "This is a respectable house," she said. "I didn't ask for references, for I thought you had a good, clean face. It seems I was wrong. The first evening you live here, you're out all night, and come sneaking in just after dawn. Well, this is no house for the likes of you, my girl. Pack your things and get." "I was working in a nightclub," I said. "Don't wait for me to get angry," she said. "I've heard that alibi before." "But my week's room rent I paid in advance," I said. "Will you give me that back?" "Will you go?" she asked. "Or must I call the police?" "I'm going," I said, and a few minutes later I plodded down the steps, dragging my suitcase. I wanted to rest. I wanted food. I didn't know which way to turn, but I was no quitter. New York lay before me. "I'll beat your game yet," I promised the city, looking up at it as I tramped along the street. I was going to try my luck once more. Were the perils I had read about all a fable? Were there no real thrills to be found by a girl alone in a great city? Was it all just small-town stuff on a big-town scale? You'll be as much surprised at what I'm going to tell you in December Smart Set as I was when it happened to me.